They issued the words like you would place a hand on a shoulder, firm enough to steady, soft enough not to bruise. Just hours before London's Catholic heart filled with mourners and music, an urgent line from Buckingham Palace cut through the morning: the Queen would not attend. Acute sinusitis. 2 clinical syllables that carry no drama on paper, and yet in a day built on symbols they reshaped everything: the choreography of a family, the balance of an institution, the mood of a country that had already begun to hold its breath for a rare and historic requiem. The statement offered thoughts and prayers for the Duke of Kent and the family, then withdrew, leaving a silence that sounded louder because of what it took away. In an age that mistrusts euphemism, this was not one. It was simply the reality that even a queen can be felled by an ache behind the eyes. The crown would walk into the cathedral without one of its pillars, and that absence would become part of the service's meaning. Westminster Cathedral answers in stone when the nation asks it to. Red brick warmed by a century of weather, cavernous arches that turn footsteps into prayer, mosaics that insist time can be made beautiful. The place was ready to hold an exception. A Catholic requiem mass for a royal in modern Britain, unusual, not impossible, intimate and public at once. The Duchess of Kent, who had chosen this faith decades ago with a seriousness that made the choice feel inevitable, would be farewelled in the language and music she loved. A piper's lament, "Sleep, dearie, sleep," threaded the service to the last great funeral the nation endured, a tune that climbs the chest and refuses to leave, the same that rounded the final corner at Windsor 3 years ago and bent even the hardest faces into grief. The night before had written its own prologue. From Kensington Palace the coffin moved to the chapel of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Soldiers of the Royal Dragoon Guards carried the weight with that paradox only regiments master: precision that looks like tenderness. The coffin was wicker, English willow woven into a choice that felt truer than gold, light to lift, rooted in the land, quiet in a city that has forgotten how to be. Over it lay the royal standard edged in white ermine, the sign of a prince's spouse, subtle as a seal but unmistakable to those who read heraldry the way others read headlines. On top, a family's grief arranged as a map of belonging, a large wreath of British garden flowers, white roses for Yorkshire where she was born, sprigs of yew from Hovingham Hall for the kind of eternity that does not brag. It was eloquence without flourish, the sort of eloquence she had preferred. It is tempting, on days like this, to talk only about titles and timelines, to reduce a life to dates and doors. But the story that drew so many to the cathedral was not dynasty, it was character. The woman who steadied Wimbledon's thunder with a hand on a champion's shoulder. The Duchess who stepped back from the satin hush of palace work and walked into a whole classroom as Mrs. Kent, teaching children to breathe in phrases and count time with their bodies. The private losses carried with a posture that made onlookers stand straighter. In a family that often speaks fluently in spectacle, she chose to speak in mercy. That choice hummed in the nave like a low note you only notice when it stops. And yet the day had to speak, too, about the machine that surrounds private love with public form. The king would lead the family into the cathedral, the Prince and Princess of Wales would enter behind, not as an image management exercise but as kin whose faces, ordinary faces on extraordinary days, teach the country how to behave. There had been a simple message from Kensington when the Duchess died, a sentence that made space for service and sadness without forcing either into performance. Now there was the stronger answer of presence. No court looks more human than when it is walking into a funeral. The steps are slow, not to be seen but because the body insists on it. Absence can be eloquent, and the Queen's absence spoke in 2 directions at once. First, toward the woman being mourned. Missing a historic family moment suggests she truly felt unwell, that this was not a diplomatic calculation, not a diary shuffle disguised as tenderness. Second, toward tomorrow, a state visit that will pull cameras and arguments across Windsor's stone like a tide, a 3-day test of ceremony and stamina with an American presidency that does not believe in empty frames. The palace line is steady, she is recovering, she intends to participate, but courtiers are not poets, and between their phrases you can feel the worry in the scheduling. Illness does not keep a calendar. The monarchy must. None of this diminished the service that followed, it sharpened it. The rite moved with the logic of loss, reception of the body, vespers, the mass itself, each stage a different kind of goodbye, each prayer a scaffolding on which those who loved her could lean for the minutes that needed leaning. The bagpipes rose and narrowed the air into a corridor of sound. Readings and responses turned the cathedral into a conversation between past and present, between the England of colonnades and the England of kitchen tables. It was unmistakably Catholic in cadence and mercy. It was unmistakably British in its obedience to order that exists to hold feeling, not to crush it. For a royal house long braided with the Church of England, the day sat easily in the hands. There are lines no longer worth policing if love is the law under consideration. Watch long enough and you notice how grief teaches protocol new manners. The security cordons were there, but softer. The cameras kept their distance by agreement as much as by barrier. Faces that typically flatten for the public lens were permitted complexity. The King's profile has learned a new gravity over a difficult year. The Princess of Wales's composure has become a kind of national barometer, a way for the country to check whether it is acceptable, at last, to exhale. Today it was. Walking in black does not equal weakness. It can be the strongest color a public life wears. When institutions are described as fragile or remote, it is often because we mistake spectacle for insulation. But the rituals of farewell cut through that argument like light through incense. A wicker coffin says more about values than a cortege of polished cars. A lament borrowed from a late queen's last day turns two griefs into one long mercy. A wreath clipped from gardens anyone could walk past, if only they knew where to look, turns a palace back into a house and a house back into a home. This is what monarchy does at its best. It uses inherited shapes to hold emotions that feel unmanageable, and it does it in public so that strangers can borrow the structure for their own losses. By the time the final commendation fell into silence, the day had revealed its argument. Not that difference must be flattened, but that it can be honored without anxiety. Not that every member must fit the same mold, but that there is enough room inside the word family for a woman who loved a different liturgy and wanted that love to shepherd her from this world to the next. The Queen's empty seat did not weaken the message, it proved it. Bodies fail. Bonds do not. Tomorrow will ask the royals to wear their other faces, the ones that negotiate, host, reassure, and endure under lights that are hotter and far less kind. Today allowed them to be exactly what the nation most needs them to be in the long intervals between grand occasions, recognizably human. Outside, the city resumed its indifferent kindness, buses, headlines, pigeons bold enough to remind everyone that London belongs to no one. Inside, a family carried a wicker weight into a deeper privacy. The Royal Dragoon Guard's tread faded, the last echo of the piper's air found a seam in the ceiling and stayed there, as if music knows how to haunt bricks better than people do. And somewhere between the cathedral's shadow and the street's glare, the monarchy, criticized, defended, forever measured, did the thing that keeps it anchored to the country it serves. It showed up, it made room, it said goodbye well.